cut was surgical and followed the grain structure of the Architect 7 alloy perfectly. Jacks had designed systems that carefully collected the glowing droplets of molten metal that dripped away. There was no room for waste. The part that was taken out, cooled in a mold that Jax had made by hand from materials the aliens had given him. Now comes the hard part, Jack said as he wiped the sweat off his forehead. The environmental control had a hard time dealing with the heat he was making with his primitive tools. I need to reforge this piece, fix the internal structure, and then put it back together while keeping the energy flow patterns. Celix asked, how will you keep the patterns going? They're quantum aligned and exist in more than one dimension. Jax cut in. They're also physical. Hey, I don't get the fancy stuff, but I get that these patterns are part of metal itself, like the memory of water running over stone. They are. The parts are worn in, and if I heat the metal right away, cool it the right way, and work it the right way, those parts will fix themselves. That's an amazing oversimplification. Is it wrong? Selig's mind was buzzing with thought. Not, they finally said. Too simple, but not wrong. The quantum alignment does follow the structure of physical world. We just never thought that the physical structure might be the most important thing. Jack smiled. Because you're too smart. The answer isn't always hard to find. He put the piece he had taken out into his forge, which looked like a joke compared to the high tech stuff around it. But it could get so hot that the alien sensors went off the charts. Jack watched the metal heat up, first turning red, then orange, and finally white, with the same intensity as a jeweler looking at a diamond. There, he whispered, noticing something in the metal structure that no tool had found. There's the weak spot, the fault line. Look at how the green structure changes. That's where the stress built up over millions of years until it finally broke. He used long tongs to pull the glowing metal out of the forge, put it on his anvil, which he had brought from Earth and had been worn smooth by years of use, and raised his hammer. The first hit sounded like a bell ringing in the room. The sound was clear, deep, and somehow right. Jax hit again and again, each time with a clear purpose. He wasn't just hitting metal, he was fixing broken molecules, closing tiny holes, and realigning crystalline structures. The scientists who were watching were spellbound. This was more than just fixing things, it was art, the highest form of ancient craftsmanship. Jax moved in a way that sounded almost like music, with the hammer going up and down in perfect time. Every time he hit it, sparks flew and made shapes in the air that looked like the energy flow designs on the star shaper itself. He's not just fixing it, Zirin said, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing with excitement. He gets it, making a connection with it. Jax worked for 6 hours straight, heating and hammering, cooling and looking, and then heating again. He tapped the metal with his hammer to see how it resonated, listening to the notes that told him stories about internal stress and how strong the structure was. He used simple calipers to measure, but he knew the tolerances on a level that went beyond numbers. Finally, he put the worked metal into a bath of his own design to cool it down. When the steam cleared, Jax took the piece out and looked at it through a simple magnifying lens. He said, it's ready. The inside structure is fixed. Now I have to put it back into the sphere. This was the time to find out the truth. It was important that the piece fit perfectly and that the energy flow patterns were restored. If Jax had made a mistake at any point in his process, the whole repair would have failed. He carefully placed the piece using guides and measuring tools. Then, even though he was tired, he started the last weld with steady hands. His torch flared up again, but this time he worked with even more care. The weld had to be perfect in every way, not just in terms of structure. He had looked at the patterns for days and knew how they should flow. He now had to recreate that flow over the weld seam. The torch moved in ways that looked almost like they were planned. Jax wasn't welding in straight lines. He was following curves and spirals that matched the design of energy flow. Under his direction, molten metal pooled and flowed, filling in gaps, bonding surfaces, and making connection that existed on both physical and quantum levels. Impossible, one scientist whispered. He's using a simple welding torch to manually recreate a quantum level alignment, Zirin said. He doesn't think of them as quantum level. He thinks of them as the way energy naturally moves through things. He doesn't think ahead. He's feeling it. Jax made the last pass, and a flash of light sealed the last millimeter of the weld. He stepped back, put down his torch, and looked at what he had done for a long time. He then tapped the fixed part with his small hammer. The note that rang out was perfect, pure, and exactly like the sound he had heard when he tested the Architect 7 sample. The sound echoed through the whole star shaper, through the core sphere, and through the chamber. And as it faded, something moved. The patterns on the sphere's surface changed. They flickered, but only for a second. Did you see that? Felix Group's voice was full of excitement. Flow of energy. Very little, but there. Jack's feet were swaying, and he was suddenly very tired. Zirin rushed over and helped him with two of her arms. Is it done? She asked. Not quite, Jack said, his voice rough from the heat and work. The repair is good, but the systems need to learn how to work again. It has been dead for 6 weeks. You can't just shock a heart that has stopped beating back to life. You have to coax it and get it back into the rhythm. How? Felix asked. Jack smiled, but it was tired. Just like you start any other cold engine, you give it a push. They told Jax he could rest for 12 hours, but he only slept for 8. The excitement was too much because he knew he was at the edge of either great success or terrible failure. When he got back to the core chamber, there were a lot of people watching. Word had spread through the research fleet, and every scientist, every important person, and every interested person wanted to see what happened next. Jax had brought one last piece of equipment from his workshop. It was so simple that the alien scientist couldn't believe it. He had made it out of piece of the sample Architect 7 alloy. So it was basically a big tuning fork. He had made it himself over the course of a day, in between breaks, shaping it so that it would resonate the exact frequency he had heard when the metal sang. Commander Oryx asked, That's how you turn it on. A metal rod that was hit. Everything vibrates, Jack said as he held the tuning fork up to the light. Every machine and system has a natural frequency or resonant tone. The star shaper hasn't made a sound in so long that it forgot how to vibrate. This will jog its memory. He walked over to the part of the core sphere that had been fixed. The weld was now hidden and perfectly blended in. The energy flow patterns went over it without stopping, but they stayed dark and still. Jax put one hand flat on the sphere's surface and felt the cold metal. He said, Here goes nothing, and then hit his knee with the tuning fork. A single note that hung in the air made a clear and pure sound. Jax put the base of the vibrating fork against the sphere's surface, right where his weld met the original structure. For a long time, nothing happened. The energy flow pattern started to glow, like a drop of dye spreading through water. It started at the point of contact and spread out in waves, following the paths Jack had studied so closely. At first, the light was very faint and hard to see, but it got brighter with each passing second. The sphere made a humming sound. It was deep sound that you could feel in your chest more than hear with your ears. The frequency matched the tuning fork's note, but it was a lower octave that echoed through the room. The star shaper and everything else. Core energy generation going up, a technician yelled, their voice tight with excitement. 5%, 10%, 15. The patterns got brighter, and the hum got deeper. Jax kept the tuning fork against the sphere, giving it that first vibration and reminding it how to sing. He could feel the metal getting warmer under his hand, like it was waking up after a long sleep. 30%, 45, 60. Now, the whole core chamber was glowing, and the patterns on every surface were moving with light. The sphere in the middle shone like a star that had been captured. Its surface was covered in flowing light that flowed paths that had been set millions of years ago. 80%, 95. Jax stepped back and took the tuning fork away. He didn't need it anymore. The starship remembered. It could sing now. 100%, the technician yelled. Full operational capacity. The research ship's sensors went crazy when the Starshaper woke up completely. Energy levels went up in all areas. The huge object started to move, and for the first time in 6 weeks, its old mechanisms started to work. External cameras showed the Starshaper projections coming out of its surface, the focusing arrays lining up, and the power conduits coming to life. There were alarms going off in the observation deck. Someone yelled, Stellar manipulation detected. The Starshaper is locking onto the binary system in Sector 7. Everyone ran to the viewports. They could see it happening, thanks to the ship's better view system. The power of the Starshaper was reaching out across millions of miles and touching stars far away. Solar winds that had been wild and damaging were suddenly redirected, channeled, and controlled. A star that was about to die and had been sputtering started to burn steadily and correctly. The binary system that kept the trade routes safe became stable, and its dance became smooth instead of erratic. The Star Shaper was doing what it was made to do, which it had been doing for 18 million years. It was changing the sky. Jack stood in the core chamber and watched the light dance on the sphere surface. He felt very right about it. This was something he had always done. Found things that were broken and fixed them. The scale was different, of course, galactic instead of industrial, but the idea was the same. Ambassador Zerine found him there, still looking at the glowing ball. Yes, you did it, she said softly. You did what the smartest person in the galaxy couldn't. I just fixed what was broken, Jack said with a tired smile, like I always do. No, Zerine said with determination. You did something much more important. You made us remember things we had forgotten. That progress isn't just about getting more complicated. You get that understanding by connecting with others, touching things, and using your hands. That sometimes the simplest answer is also the most complicated one. Jax turned to look at her and saw the respect in her 6 eyes. Will it last? The fix. Our sensors show that the structure is actually stronger than it was before, Dr. Seelig said as she walked up to them. There was a sense of awe in the Thren's collective voice. Your reforging process got rid of tiny flaws. that had been building up for millions of years. Jack's motto, the Star Shaper isn't just fixed, it's been renewed. How long did you work on this? Jax asked with interest. Before I got here, Selig said. 6 weeks of hard work, billions of dollars, hundreds of scientists, and the most advanced technology in the galaxy. And I fixed it in less than a week with a hammer and a welding torch, Jack said, shaking his head in disbelief. Sorry, but you guys think too much. A sound that was like laughter for aliens echoed through the room. The scientists were really laughing at themselves, at how arrogant they were, and at how simple the solution they had missed was. Commander Oryx walked into the room, and his crystal like body glowed with colors. Jax had learned that indicated meant pleasure and satisfaction. Mr. Morrow, the Galactic Council has asked me to thank you very much. You saved Sector 7, protected a priceless artifact, and taught us a valuable lesson in how to be humble. Just doing my job, Jack said, and then stopped. Even though I'm interested in one thing, why did it take so long for someone to think of hiring someone like me? Zirin said honestly. Pride. We were so sure that complicated problems needed complicated answers. The thought that a primitive approach might work. It made us question some of our most basic beliefs about progress and sophistication. Well, you're not primitive anymore, Commander Oryx said to Jax directly. By order of the Galactic Council, you are now a master technician, first class, with all the rights and privileges that come with the title in all member civilizations. People will look into your methods and value your insights. Jax didn't like the praise. Thanks for that, but I'm not a genius. I just listened to what the metal was saying. If they had listened, anyone could have done it. But they didn't, Selig said. Only you did. That's what makes you so special. As news of Jack's success spread through the research fleet and beyond, more and more people started coming to the core chamber. Scientists from many different fields came to see the person who had fixed the star shaper. They wanted to ask questions and learn how he did it. Jax ended up giving impromptu talks about metallurgy, how materials behave under stress, and how important it is to understand the basics before trying to solve problems that are too hard. What shocked him the most was how interested they were. These people with technology that looked like magic were paying close attention as he talked about simple things like how metal behaves at different temperature, how crystals form, and how heat expands everything. It was like teaching kindergarten to people with PhDs, but the PhDs were thankful for the lesson. One government scientist said, we've been so focused on the quantum level that we forgot about the physical. We can change matter at subatomic level, but we've lost touch with how that matter behaves at scale we can see and touch. Maybe that's what humans are supposed to do in the galaxy, another person said, keeping us grounded and reminding us of the basics. Jack stayed on the research ship for 3 more days, helping the scientists write down what he did and figure out the reason for his success. He taught them to trust their instruments as much as their senses, to listen to metal, and to feel the flow of energy through structure. Jack stood in the core chamber one last time, on the last day before he went back to the earth. The sphere glowed steadily, and the part that had been fixed looked like the rest of it. The Star Shaper sang its deep song, which would last for millions of years. Will you come back to see us? Zirin asked. Over the past few days, she had become a friend, not just translating words, but also whole ways of thinking. Jack smiled and said, Sure, if you need something fixed, but I have a feeling You guys won't be calling me for a while. You learned what you needed to know. Which one? That old doesn't mean outdated. That easy doesn't mean basic. And that sometimes the best way to do a job that seems impossible is to have a steady hand and a good grasp of the basics. Zirin touched his shoulder with one of her smaller hands, which is a sign of deep respect in her culture. You've changed the galaxy, Jax Morrow. You might not see it yet, but you have. As the transport took Jax back to Earth, he looked back at the Star Shaper one last time. It hung in space like a glowing piece of art, a sign of how smart people were in the past and how hard people work now. He thought about the trip, all the things he'd learned, and the amazing people he'd met. But he mostly thought about how to get home, back to the factory, back to his workshop, and back to the fixing the machines that kept society running without most people noticing. That's what he did. He had always done that. He just did it a little better. Now that he knew that the most important fixes didn't always happen in factories or shipyards. Sometimes they happen in the way people thought about problems. That it took 3 months after Jax got back to the Earth for the first changes to show up. At first, they were small and easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But Ambassador Zirin was paying attention. The Galactic Technical Institute, which is the best engineering school in known space, had changed all of its classes. Students would have to take classes in practical material interaction for the first time in school's 12,000-year history. This meant that they would have to do real physical work. They were informally calling it the Jack's Morrow Protocol. It didn't matter what the formal name was. The message was clear. Theoretical knowledge alone was no longer enough. Zerine watched from her office as the first group of students, representing 40 different species, walked into a workshop that looked strangely old fashioned compared to the usual clean labs. For the next 6 months, they would learn how to work with metal, weld, and understand materials by touching them directly. Some of the older teachers had complained, some still were, but a simple demonstration showed them they were wrong. Give 100 engineers who had been trained in the traditional way a difficult mechanical problem. Then give the same problem to 10 technicians who know how to do things Jack's way. The technicians had fixed it 3 times faster and in a more elegant way. Earth's communication channels were flooded with requests. Every major civilization wanted to set up exchange programs so that their engineers could learn from human technicians. The new Detroit industrial complex, where Jax worked, had become an unlikely place for alien scientists to visit. At first, Jax thought about all the attention was too much. He thought that when he got home, he would be able to go back to his old life, where he quietly fixed machines that kept the world going. Instead, he found that people were always coming to see him at work, recording everything he did and treating his casual comments as if they were deep wisdom. It's getting silly, he told his boss and longtime friend, Maria Santos, during their coffee break. Yesterday, a Colweth engineer asked me to explain the mystical connection I had with metal. I told him that it's not magic, it's just experience and paying attention. He wrote down experience and attention as if I had told him the secret of the universe. Maria laughed. She had worked with Jax for 15 years, when they were both just starting out. You did tell a secret, Jax. Not the one you think. You showed them that being smart doesn't mean being hard. I'm not a genius, I'm just a welder, Maria reminded him. You're the welder who fixed something that no one else in the galaxy could fix. That makes you unique, whether you like it or not. Jack sighed. But he couldn't argue with what she said. Things would never be the same for him. What to do with that change was the question. The answer came in a way that was not expected. Dr. Sarah Chen, a materials scientist at the Mars Polytechnic Institute, got in touch with an interesting idea. She had been reading Jack's report on Architect 7 alloy, which was used to make the Star Shaper. She had questions, ideas, and theories that helped him understand things better in real life, and her understanding of them in theory. During their first video call, she said, "What if we worked together? You show me how to see materials the way you do, and I'll show you the science behind how you feel. We might be able to understand things better if we work together." At first, Jax wasn't sure, but he liked that Sarah didn't pretend to know things she didn't. She really wanted to learn things from him when she said that, not in a condescending way. They started working together by doing simple tests. Jax would work with a piece of metal and talk about what he felt, heard, and sensed. Sarah would run tests that linked his observations to real world data. Patterns started to show up slowly. When Jack said a metal felt tired, Sarah's instrument showed that the crystal structure had more dislocations. When he said it wanted to flow, her thermal imaging showed the best temperature ranges for the plastic to change shape. His gut feeling was right on with what the scientists were measuring, but he was sensing things in real time that her tools could only pick up on later. Sarah said during one session, "It's like you're reading the metal's body language. You're picking up thousands of tiny signals, changes in colors, sound, temperature, and even small flexes, and your brain is putting them all together into a whole picture faster than any computer could." "Jax, I just learned to pay attention," he said. "You learned to combine sensory data in a way that our technology can't yet do," Sarah said. "That's not just anything. We can teach that skill, but we need to know how it works first." Other people noticed their work. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a robotics expert who wanted to make tools that could work better with materials, soon joined them. Then there was Marcus Webb, an anthropologist who looked at the history of human craftsmanship. The team grew naturally, with each person adding their own point of view. They called themselves the Integration Project, which meant bringing together hands on craft and scientific knowledge. Their lab was a mix of workshop and a research space, with forges and welding station next to electron microscopes and spectrometers. In space, on the other hand, the effects of Jack's repair were spreading in ways that were not expected. The Thren Collective, whose hive mind had first been very critical on Jack's method, had changed their minds completely. Dr. Seelix, who had worked with Jax directly, had become a supporter of what they called embodied cognition. This was the idea that interacting with the world physically gave you a kind of understanding that pure calculation couldn't. Seelix said in a lecture that was broadcast across 17 star system, "We were stuck in abstraction. We could model anything and simulate anything, but we had lost the ability to really feel problems we were trying to solve." Jack's motto taught us that we don't just understand something by thinking about it, we also understand it by touching it, working with it, and getting to know it well. The lecture started arguments all over the galaxy. Some species quickly accepted the idea. Some people didn't want to do it because they thought it was a step back. But things started to change slowly and inevitably. The machine collective, which was made up of synthetic beings that lived only as digital consciousness in mechanical frames, started to play around with tactical sensors and direct material manipulation. They learned things that had never known before by having bodies that could feel pressure, temperature, and texture. The warmth, who could control matter with their minds. made their students work with materials by hand before they could use their psychic powers. They discovered that people who had physically forged metal could shape it more beautifully with their minds afterward. The Kolvath Empire, which was far away and proud, had the best technology in the galaxy, even started adding practical workshops to their engineer training programs. Ambassador Zirin wrote reports about everything, calling it the practical revolution. Jax got regular updates from her, which he read with a mix of pride and disbelief. Did you mean to start a movement across the galaxy? During one of their video calls, Zirin asked him. I was going to fix a broken machine, Jack said. Everything else just happened. That's how revolutions often start, Zirin said with a smile that Jax had learned to recognize. Someone does something simple and useful, and it brings back memories of things that everyone had forgotten. Not everyone liked these changes. Some people, especially some older people, who had built their careers on pure theory and advanced technology, didn't want to change. They thought that using primitive methods was an insult to progress. The backlash reached its peaks at Galactic Science Summit, which took place that year on a neutral space station that orbited a system of three stars. Jax was asked to be a guest speaker, but he almost said no. He didn't like talking in front of people. It sounded like torture to stand in front of thousands of smartest people in the galaxy. Maria, on the other hand, talked him into going. She said, they need to hear from you directly, not second-hand stories, not interpretations. You, Jax, was on stage in front of audience that included people from 73 different civilizations. They were all waiting to hear what the human welder had to say. He didn't have a speech and presentation graphics or any data with him. He stood there in his work clothes, which he had refused to take off, and spoke from the heart. He started by saying, I'm not a scientist. By your standards, I am not even an engineer. I'm someone who fixes things. That's all I have ever been. I didn't understand the quantum mechanics or the dimensional physics when they asked me to look at the star shaper. To be honest, I still don't. Some people in the audience moved around uncomfortably. Did he really say he didn't know? But I know about materials, Jack said next. I know how to work with metal, heat, and force, how things fit together. I've worked with my hands all my life, and I've learned something important. The universe is based on simple rules. Those principles are the foundation of everything else, including all the complicated stuff and advanced theory. He took a small metal rod out of his pocket. This is steel. It's just normal steel from Earth. Nothing special. But if you really know steel, you know the basics of how all metals act. The fancy stuff, the impossible alloy, and the architect material all follow the same basic rules. At a higher level, they just do it. Jax held the rod up. I wasn't using alien technology when I fixed the star shaper. I was working with metal that was forged millions of years ago by people who knew the same things I do. They might have been more advanced, but they were still using the same materials, physics, and the universe. He put the rod down and looked at the people in front of him. Up there, I learned this. You people are very smart, more intelligent than I ever will be. But there are times when you're so smart that you don't see the obvious answers. You try to find complicated answers to complicated problems, but you don't see that sometimes the problem isn't that complicated at all. Someone in the audience yelled, are you saying that advanced civilizations should stop using advanced technology and go back to using simple tools? No, Jack said firmly. Don't forget the basics. I'm saying, don't let your advanced knowledge get in the way of your understanding of basic reality. of what you're working with. Use your fancy tools, your models, and your dimensional analysis, but also use your hands. Touch the things, pay attention to them. Get that gut feeling that comes from doing things yourself. Someone else said, but intuition can't be measured. It can't be taught in a planned way. Of course it can, Jack said. It's called practice. It's called experience. You learn by doing things, making mistakes, and doing things over and over until you get the hang of them. That's how we learned everything we know. We touched the world, and the world taught us. He stopped for a moment and said, look, I'm not saying I'm better than any of you. I'm not. You know things I will never know, but I remembered something you had forgotten. And if we put your knowledge together with my hands on experience, think of what we could do. That's not going back, that's going in a new direction. The silence after his speech was very deep. Then slowly, people started to clap. It started with a few people and quickly spread through the crowd like a wave. Within seconds, thousands of beings were showing their approval in whatever way their species did applause. Color displays, harmonic tones, and pheromone releases. The scientific community in the galaxy recognized not only Jack's achievement, but also his message, leaving him speechless. He had just told the smartest people in the world that they need to remember how to use their hands, and they all agreed with him. People came up to Jax after his speech to talk to him, ask him questions, and share their own stories. He met engineers who had been made fun of for wanting to work with their hands. He met scientists who felt like they had to only work on theory. He met teachers who had worked hard to keep hands on learning in their classes. One young friend said to him, you let us do it. Let us trust our direct experience as much as our math. Permission to trust experience stuck with Jax. Did the galaxy really need that? It seems that it did. In the next weeks, after the summit, real changes started to happen more quickly. The Galactic Engineering Standards Board changed. Its certification requirements to include required hands on experience. New research facilities were built that combined regular workshops with high tech labs. Alien students came to Earth to learn from human craftspeople, and human students went to alien worlds to learn their advanced theories. The synthesis was starting, bringing together old craft with new science, and at the heart of it all was a new Detroit welder who just wanted to make things better. 6 months after the summit, Jax was surprised to find himself in a new role, teacher at the newly opened Institute for Integrated Engineering, which was a joint project between Earth and seven other civilizations. The campus was built on Luna, in the Sea of Tranquility. It had domed buildings where people all over the galaxy would work. At first, Jax didn't want to. He didn't like teaching. He was a doer, not a talker. But Sarah Chen made him change his mind with a simple point. If you don't teach them directly, they learn a version of your methods from people who don't fully understand them. They'll turn your practical wisdom into rigid dogma. She was right. Jax had already seen people teach the Moro method in ways that completely missed the point. People were making lists and rules to try to make sense of something that was really about learning to be flexible and trust your gut. He agreed, but only if he didn't have to teach in a classroom. He would teach in a workshop where students would learn by working with him on real problems. The institute agreed, and now Jax was in a huge workshop that combined the best of human and alien design. There were welding stations and forges, but there were also material synthesizers and quantum analyzers. There were traditional tools on the walls next to machines, that could change matter at molecular level. It was a lovely mix of old and new. There were 30 students from 12 different species in first class. Some were young people and who were just starting school. Some were experienced engineers who had been sent by their governments to learn new ways of doing things. They all looked at Jax with a mix of respect and doubt. On the first day, Jack said, "No lectures. We're going to build things, fix things, and work with materials until you know them like the back of your hand, or whatever you have instead of bones." The different people in the crowd all laughed at the same time. First lesson: every material has a personality, Jack said as he held up samples of different metals and alloys. Steel is reliable but needs to be respected. Aluminium is forgiving but weak under pressure. Titanium is stubborn as hell but loyal once you figure it out. These alien alloys you'll be working with. Same thing. They have their own personalities and quirks. A Colbat student lifted two of his arms. But personality means being aware. Materials aren't aware. No, but they behave the same way because of their structure and composition, Jack said. Personality is a short way of saying a lot of different things that you learn to recognize. For example, when I say steel is reliable, I mean that it behaves the same way in a lot of different situations. When I say titanium is stubborn, I mean that it needs special techniques and doesn't forgive mistakes easily. You'll understand what I mean by working with them. He put students into teams, making sure that different types of students with different levels of skill were on the same team. Each team had to fix a broken pressure vessel using both traditional welding and cutting edge material science. The ships had been broken on purpose in a different ways, and each one was hard in its own way. Jack said, "Figure it out. Use whatever tools and methods make sense. I'll be walking around and answering questions, but I won't give you the answer. You have to figure it out on your own." The workshop turned into a good kind of chaos. Teammates were giving students who had never used a welding torch before quick lessons. Others were doing material analysis to figure out what they were working with. Jax moved from one team to another, giving advice but not answers. One of the Tran students at a station was having trouble with a torch. Their collective minds could control billions of individual organisms with perfect accuracy, but it was hard to control just one welding tool. "You're overthinking things," Jack said. "Stop trying to figure out the exact angle and heat distribution. Just feel the torch and let your hand find the right spot on its own. But to be precise, you have to do the math." "Not this kind of accuracy," Jack said. "Your brain is great at processing information, but right now it's getting in the way. Turn down the calculation and turn up the sensation." The Thren fought for a while longer, and then something clicked. Their movements became fluid instead of planned, and natural instead of exact. The weld started to flow smoothly. "That's it," Jack said to encourage. "That's the feeling you want to keep in the mind." A Warmth student at another station was getting angry. They could change matter with their minds, but they had been told to do this work by hand. They said, "This is not efficient. I could fix this ship in a matter of seconds with my skills." "Of course," Jack said, "but could you teach someone else how to do it? Could you tell them why you did that, what you did? Or would it just be instinct, something you can't put into words?" The student stopped and thought. "Doing it by hands make you understand the steps," Jack said. "When you change matter with your mind, you're taking shortcuts that your subconscious understands, but your conscious mind doesn't. If you do it the slow way, you learn things about how matter behaves that will make you better when you use your abilities." The Warmin student thought about it for a moment, but then They nodded and went back to their manual work with more determination. The first day ended up with a mix of good and bad results. Some teams had done well. Some people had just begun. A few of them made their repairs worse. But all of the students were tired in a way they had never been before, from doing hard work and dealing with stubborn reality. Tomorrow, we'll talk about what worked and what didn't, Jax told them as they left. And we'll talk about why you learn by doing, but you get wisdom by thinking about what you did. From the observation gallery, Dr. Sarah Chen took notes. She had become Jack's unofficial co instructor, helping him turn his natural knowledge into more formal structures. They were working together to create a way of teaching that respected both practical knowledge and theoretical knowledge. After the students left, she asked Jax, "How do you think it went?" Jax said, "Better than I thought. A few of them are starting to get it. The rest will come around when they see results." Sarah said, "You're a natural teacher, even if you don't see yourself that way." "I just remember how hard it was to learn this stuff," Jack said. "Nobody taught me by lecturing. They showed me, let me try and fixed by mistakes. This isn't just teaching, it's mentoring. Is there a difference? Teaching is giving someone information. Mentoring is helping someone find things out for themselves." Jack smiled. These students don't need more facts. They need to learn by doing and have someone help them understand what they learn. The workshop changed a lot in the weeks that followed. The students no longer saw practical work as a core. Instead, they saw it as a way to learn. They started to get what Jax had been saying, that working with materials directly showed them things that no amount of theoretical study could. The big step happened forward when they had to make all the parts for a working fusion reactor for their first big project. It was a big project that included metalworking, energy systems, and very precise engineering. Jax put the class into groups that worked on different parts of the project. Some worked on the reactor vessel, some on the magnetic containment, and some on the fuel system. It was necessary for everyone to talk and work together all the time so that each piece would fit perfectly. The people working on the reactor vessel were having a hard time. Jax let them fight for a day before stepping in. "You are fighting the material," he said. "Stop trying to make it act like regular steel. Treat it like titanium on steroids. Preheat it more. Use shorter welds and let it cool between passes. It's tough, so you have to convince it, not command it." The team changed how they were doing things, and all of a sudden, the hard alloy was easy to work with. The lesson spread through the workshop. Every material needed its own way of being treated and respected. At the same time, the magnetic containment team found something interesting. They were making crystal structures with better magnetic properties by making their parts by hand instead of using fabricators. When metal was forged by hand and then cooled slowly, it had fewer flaws than when it was made quickly. One student said out loud, "Sometimes slow is better. When we don't rush the material into shape, it works better." "Now you're getting it," Jack said with a real happiness. "Efficiency isn't always about how fast you